Apparently, you know some legal insider trading.
You just invest a few days before that date, the PDUFA date, and then try to catch whatever move happens.
Yeah.
And then kind of get in and get out during that time of volatility.
So you just wake up one morning, look at the PDUFA calendar, maybe 3 to 5 days before, be like, oh, new drug is launching. Quick Google search, quick NCBI search, quick PubMed search, and then be like, this will do good or bad.
Yeah.
Welcome to Simulated Podcast. Too good to be true.
Welcome back to Simulated Podcast. We got Jeffrey Koury on the podcast number 7. And I want to start with something super, super controversial. Apparently, you know some legal insider trading. Let's talk about that.
In the past life. So there was something I used to do, didn't know if it was gonna be successful or not, but I guess you just gonna have to take a stab at things sometimes and see how they play out. But
like all things,
like all things, but like take a stab at it, and like half the stuff fails or more than half usually, and then like some of it works. But this was one that like didn't work too well, but definitely had its successes. But yeah, it was like kind of, I guess one thing is really important to think about is like finding inefficiencies or like pockets of areas where you can I guess you have a unique skill set where you can actually figure something out that someone else can't figure out. Like in investing, they often call it like edge, like trying to find some edge.
Yeah.
But yeah, so what I used to do, this was a few years back now, which was I try to leverage a lot of my scientific background. So, right, I'm a PhD student right now, wrapping that up. So I have good insight onto like at least how to read and interpret scientific literature. And so I would go into some of the PubMed published articles on different clinical trials and try to infer. There's like some things that are very, I suppose, very apparent about those. So it's like very clear. They distinctly label the adverse effects. They distinctly label, certain parameters. So that's, I guess everyone can interpret that, but there's some undertones in scientific literature where you can kind of pick up when someone is trying to maybe state something, a conclusion that's a little bit overzealous to what the data was showing and things like that. So trying to use some of that insight into interpreting kind of how viable a drug or a therapeutic was. And there were these given publicly stated dates that the FDA would have to make a decision on a drug.
Yeah. And just to clarify for the audience, so it's called the PDUFA schedule. I'm calling it the PDUFA schedule. The many pharmaceuticals have to publish when they're about to launch a drug publicly, commercialization, and that can affect their stock price
tremendously.
Anywhere from a 5% jump to, I don't know how many percent jump have you seen on a good drug?
This was a long time ago, so I'm trying to recall, but yes, stuff on the order of like 20 or 30% or something, something like that. But it's like volatility goes both ways, and so.
But you can still make money both ways.
You can make money both ways.
Yeah.
You can certainly make money both ways. Options trading, or like there's like perpetual futures on things, but so you'd kind of interpret what you thought was going to happen based off of a lot of the scientific literature. And obviously there's like a lot of unknowns that are in there as well. Like sometimes the FDA dings you for things like, poor labeling on like the bottle or something like that.
Something
and they won't
stupid.
pass you. Yeah.
Okay.
But anyway, just based off the scientific content, you can interpret whether or not that thing was going to likely be successful or like had some undertones suggesting like maybe it might not be. And then you just invest a few days before that date, the PDUFA date, and then try to catch whatever move happens.
Yeah.
And then kind of get in and get out during that time of volatility.
So you just wake up one morning, look at the PDUFA calendar, maybe 3 to 5 days before, be like, oh, new drug is launching. Quick Google search, quick NCBI search, quick PubMed search, and then be like, this will do good or bad.
Yeah.
But can I be a scientist? Do I have to be a PhD, or can I be a layman? Can I be a regulatory affairs expert?
Yeah.
What sort of expertise do I need to have to be able to do the legal insider trading?
So so Sim mentioned, it's like it's legal because all this is public, right?
Yeah.
So this is all data and information that like the pharmaceutical companies have to disclose publicly when they're working with the FDA and things like that. So so it's all fair game. Who do you have to be? So it's really, and this goes to like a kind of broader problem, I think, with science communication and how science is conveyed to I'll call say the layman.
Sure.
But uh, so right now, a lot of this information, and with good reason, biology could be like quite complex. There's a lot of moving parts, and so it's hard to like distill all of that down into just one simple, easily digestible like statement for
Yeah.
someone to like really absorb if they don't know like the background information. So I think you really have to be like an academic to interpret a lot of that information.
Interesting.
Like if you know you know that the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell.
Yes.
Right?
Ugh.
Like absolutely. But like there's a lot of nuance that goes into kind of some of the higher order
Okay.
clinical trials. Outside of clinical trials, just like scientific like experimentation and design and things. So I'd say you have to be fairly well read, and nowadays like all of this information is available to anybody. It just the learning curve, if you have a baseline of not knowing any science, to get there is a very steep learning curve.
I wonder if you could just drop it in ChatGPT, like the abstract, the whole journal article, and be like, "Hey, do you think this would pass the PDUFA calendar?" I wonder if anyone's tried that. That could be enough.
That's a pretty good idea. I've never actually like thought of that, but there's a lot of like ChatGPT like competitors that are doing at least like layman summaries of scientific literature, so you can put them in. I think there's one called Chat PDF where you can throw in a PDF and then just start asking it questions, and it'll give you answers based off of the content that's in that PDF. So there's like ways now, like literally in the last few months.
Only in the last few months.
Yeah, where you can like, I think more as a non-traditional scientific person, get the info that you need. But I'd say to really truly kind of understand it, you probably need to have the scientific background for it.
Okay, fair. Also, there's a website for you and for the audience. It's called there's an AI for that.com. So if you want to just like, oh, I don't know which AI I need, but you can just Google search in that website. I need a photo editor. I need a journal article summarizer. It has Midjourney and all those other fun, AI tools. But you're like, I need this, and it'll give you like 10, 15 different AI tools. So check that out.
So I know you're the lead on this podcast, but I want to ask you a question.
sure.
Is what, like, have you found that using a lot of those AI tools have actually proven to be useful and helpful, or do you find that there's enough issues and artifacts that come out of them where they're not as useful as people perceive them to be in the honeymoon phase of the whole AI?
Yeah. So I think it's right now AI is a little bit too early, personally. You need to have your brain working along with ChatGPT. So I'll give you a perfect example. So I was doing a market research for a company I was consulting for, and they're like, "Hey, would this product be good? What is this product, and like, what is its potential outcome in the U.S. market?" I was like, "All right, cool. Let me just ask ChatGPT." And I looked it up. I was like, "This makes sense." But then I personally deep dived into it, right? And before even deep diving it, I gave it a perfect like, "Hey, act as a perfect script." I was like, "Act as a marketing analyst. This is my parameters. These are my close parameters. Do this." Then I was like, okay, now I know a little bit more about it. Then I'm like, okay, let's deep dive into your third bullet point. It was like a lot of active back and forth. If I was a CEO, that's how I'd be, asking my, market analyst person. So it's a little bit of twofold. And I'm sure I'm guessing you're leading into this question. Is it potential use in like the medical field as a doctor or something, right? Because I think that's going to evolve into that down the road, but it has a lot of fear involved as well.
Yeah. I'm just curious. I always ask people that question, which is like, because in my experience, it's been useful for superficial things, but terrible for nuanced things.
Yeah.
That's been my experience with it. And I wanted to see if that's across different sectors and spectrums, the same thing that's occurring. Because like, for example, and maybe we can get into Research Hub a little bit, but
I want to.
In Research Hub, it's kind of the premise of that is to make sure that there's like an open avenue for people to be able to openly discuss science, whether good or bad, and like have the scientific community or just the community at large kind of curate that content Reddit style a little bit with up and down votes. And a lot of people we've noticed since ChatGPT came out have been making ChatGPT generated responses for things. So someone might ask, hey, can somebody provide a peer review for this paper? Or, oh, I'm inquiring about, this particular question, and a chat GPT response comes out. And oftentimes people request citation. Is there a citation that you can put there that would kind of strengthen your argument? And because they're chat GPT generated, what they'll do is actually auto-generate fake citations.
Yeah, I've heard that.
Yeah, so they'll have fake citations, and then if you at a glance you'll look at it like, oh, that looks great. Like the response is very thorough. Then you start looking into it. You click a couple of the links. You highlight some of the citations they referenced and try to paste them into Google, and they don't come up with anything because they're not real. Yeah, so that's
so
like
it's
stuff.
trying to. But see, that's what you got to do. You got to deep dive into. Let's say, hey, it gives you, let's say, 9 published articles. You have to read those articles.
Yeah.
Or you can be like, hey, give me the reference and websites, the links to the articles. You have to actually engage with it.
Totally.
Right?
Totally.
And that's true in any realm of life, right? But now we're into Research Hub. Please tell me what Research Hub is in a nutshell, and let's go into it. I want to know way more about Research Hub, and I think it's gonna be the next big thing.
Yeah. It's a really cool project, and it's at the intersection of so it's kind of at the intersection of science and blockchain. So it's kind of this like thin slice. You had like 2 Venn diagrams of like people who are like kind of privy to science and people who are like privy to blockchain. It's like there's really like thin like overlap in the Venn diagram of that. So it's something that like I've been quite passionate about, and I came up actually with a similar idea, and then kind of went fishing through the web and ended up finding Research Hub because I was like, I want to see if if this exists already. But the idea with it is in science, a lot of people, and this is much lesser known to like people who have not been involved in science, but I'll walk through like kind of like the flow here. So anyone watching this podcast is probably paying taxes, and you're a taxpayer and your money goes towards various things. One of the things that your taxes are earmarked for is like a budget to the NIH, so the National Institute of Health. The National Institute of Health gives grants to researchers in academic labs, right? So they'll like give money to you to do some kind of research, and that researcher should publish that data to make it accessible to other scientists or industry, people in pharma to help build drugs. They themselves should try to build drugs, but that information is the output of what the taxpayers gave them money for.
Okay.
So right now, the way it works is because academics are trying to publish in really prestigious journals, that requires a lot of time to generate the data, and to get really high quality data, it takes especially a long time and rigor, which is important. You need to have rigor in science.
And
But
a lot of money too, I would imagine.
a lot of money. So like R01s will give you like $1 million a year or something like that. Some of them are like smaller grants, like, a couple 100,000, things like that. But so that's money coming from the taxpayer, and then you have to
That's it.
publish content,
Yeah.
like scientific content that's going to help eventually make a therapeutic or elucidate a mechanism for something. And right now, the way it works is researchers hoard a bunch of data for years of data, just so they can aggregate it together and finally publish it in a high impact journal at the end. And because the incentive is I need to publish in a high impact journal because that's what helps get me future funding, that's what helps move my career forward. That's what researchers are incentivized to do.
And that's the wrong incentivization route. I feel like you shouldn't incentivize all across every segment of research. Feels like.
Yeah, but like also that the incentive here is to hoard the data for a long period of time. It doesn't see the light of day for years. So think about if I was holding on to some really pivotal piece of information that would have helped Pfizer make a drug much quicker. But I held on to it for 3 years because I need to get into a good academic journal.
It sounds like the dark ages, but today, which is really sad.
Yeah, and really the journal is just publishing your PDF, making it public. So that's kind of the way that it's structured now.
Yeah.
So with Research Hub, what we're aiming to do is have an incentive structure where it actually incentivizes you to do a little bit of the opposite of that, which is we want you to openly discuss, openly publish your data, and try to publish it more in real time, kind of as you get nuggets of quality data come in. And that way, what we'll do is we'll incentivize you. We'll pay you to do those things, and it helps the scientific community at large get to pieces of data a lot quicker that would have otherwise been hoarded for a couple of years. And then really the mission of Research Hub is to accelerate the pace of science.
Yeah.
And so we think that right now things are getting bottlenecked because data is being hoarded for years on end.
Okay, so who's funding Research Hub right now?
Yeah, so Research Hub right now was co-founded by Patrick Joyce, who was someone who was in a PhD program and also in med school, ended up dropping out to kind of, after seeing some of the issues that were involved in academia and in science, co-founded the company. And he co-founded it with actually Brian Armstrong, who is the CEO of Coinbase, which is really cool. Yeah. So he is the other co-founder, and
That's huge.
Yeah,
that's really huge.
Yeah, he actually posted a blog post, I think back in 2019 or 2020, something like that, where it was kind of this kind of whole statement around why isn't science operating like open source software?
It's like GitHub.
Yeah, like GitHub. Like you're trying to become like a GitHub of science. And so that was a really big issue because open source software is you put everything out in the open. You have people come and like assess the content of your code and the quality of your code. And like, why isn't science being done like that? You know? So anyway, yeah, so it's co-founded by those two individuals, and actually just announced last month, Research Hub raised a $5 million investment from a few individuals, led by, I think, some OSS Capital, and then some other really prominent people. If anyone's familiar with Y Combinator, the president and CEO, Gary Tan, was one of the individuals that also invested as well, and a few like more software driven
Good stuff.
folks.
Good stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, so to publish on Research Hub, how does one do it then?
Yeah. So to go through some of the flow of that, it's very straightforward. There's and maybe you're familiar with Benchling.
I'm not. No.
No. Okay. So it's like they have these like online electronic lab notebooks. So they're, rather than like the way it runs in an academic lab is like so primitive.
Yeah.
It feels like you're a caveman because you have just like a physical notebook. You take all of your notes on what you did that day in that notebook. And then when you need to reference it, you like fish through your like 3 notebooks you have and try to find the information. Definitely not caught up to the 21st century at all. So one thing we have on Research Hub is an electronic lab notebook where you can put all of your notes for every day you do any of lab work, any content you want to write, any papers you want to publish. You can write them on there, and you can think of it like a Google Doc. You can invite contributors and collaborators to work with you.
Sick.
And what you can do once you're ready to publish it, traditionally what you do is you'd go through a journal. It takes usually many, many months to publish because they have to find reviewers to review your stuff. And so with Research Hub, you just go into your lab notebook, you draft up whatever you need to draft up with your contributors, and you just hit a button that says publish. Okay. And you can assign authorship and then publish that content onto kind of a news feed that's up there.
How do you make money on Research Hub? You said just by publishing, or is there other ways to make money on Research Hub?
Yeah, so there's like a reward algorithm that's on there, and really it's based off of people's content being up and down voted. Okay. So I can
just
publish.
like Reddit.
It's just like Reddit. So I can publish something with you, and if I publish it and the scientific community thinks this is a high impact thing, they can upvote your content. And if your content gets upvoted, and depending on who's upvoting it, and there's different weightings of things, then you will earn some kind of revenue. And this is revenue from the native token that we have, Research Coin. And that gets dripped into your account in real time. Cool. And then if you'd ever like to use that, there's other features on the platform you can use that for, or you can convert that out into US dollar if that's what you're interested in.
Okay, so what about as a non-scientist? Can I participate in Research Hub or read, or besides funding, anyone can fund, but can I participate?
Yes, yeah, you can participate. You can ask questions. You can answer questions that you think you might know the answer to. And again, the community will kind of vet whether or not that was a quality or not quality answer. You can set up a bounty is one thing there is, which is you can use your Research Coin and say, hey, I'm willing to give $50 worth of research coin for somebody to be able to help me, summarize this paper or help me answer this question, this medical
Cool.
question I might have. So that's like one of the uses that research coin offers on the platform. But
How would you prevent, I guess, fake stuff, fake news, or like a massive million people just downvoting, upvoting, maybe a fake article or fake data? How do you prevent, or how do you ensure data integrity, I guess?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. So that goes to an issue that's a lot more upstream that a lot of like software companies and more like social media companies have, which is like bot prevention and like authenticity and verification.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's like actually a few things being worked on in like the blockchain world
Mm-hmm.
that are, so there's one thing called zero knowledge proofs,
Mm-hmm.
which is a really cool concept where you can prove kind of various things about yourself without disclosing exactly what those things are or who
Interesting.
you are.
Mm.
Yeah, so some people who like to remain, say, pseudonymous, they're able to prove that maybe they have a degree in this, or they can prove that they're a resident of the United States without actually having to fully disclose that information to the public.
Okay.
So anyway, that's one way, but there's also other verification metrics
Okay.
too,
That's
like
good to have.
authorizing your like ORCID, right? Which is like it's like a profile that has all your academic stuff on there. So you can authorize with other, like we call them like Web 2 credentials
Okay.
to show you're a real person.
And talking about Web 2, you're also a crypto bro. How's the crypto life right now in this bear market for you, or are you waiting for the next bull run and the next halving of Bitcoin?
Yeah, the next halving's in May of 2024. So people are not privy, that's like when the emission rate of Bitcoin gets cut in half. And so you can notice usually there's 4-year cycles in the cryptocurrency market. It's different being on the other end of it,
Mhm.
which is I got into crypto back in 2017.
Yep.
We've talked about it a few times. More just like actually started mining Zcash.
I think it was like way before 2017, I feel like.
No, it's 2017. I was in my master's program at the time.
Okay.
And I started, one of my friends in my program got me into it and started mining Zcash at the time.
Mhm.
So I was looking at it more like it was like, oh, an opportunity to make some money. It's like more like investing side of things. And so I was kind of in it more on like the investing side for the last few years until I joined Research Hub. And now I'm in it through the perspective of kind of being a builder in the space and trying to create a product and things like that. And as an investor, people look at it right now and they're like, oh, we're in a bear market. The price of things are down because people, got a little ahead of themselves.
Yeah.
But from the builder perspective, it's actually everyone's firing on all cylinders. There's a bunch of innovations happening on the back end, and it takes time for things to get built out. I think that's what people don't realize. It's like takes a long time for things to get like quality controlled and like built out and then adopted and marketed and things like that. So those things take time, and right now it's on the building side of things. There's so much innovation and like pillars of like Web3 that are being built out that I'm very excited for the coming couple years when those things come to scale and come to fruition.
Okay, so this is the crypto Web 2 time of being a builder and using crypto for any sort of, I guess, utility right now. This is the building of utility of crypto.
Yeah.
Stage. Okay.
Yeah. There's like I think one thing that crypto wasn't, there was a couple of uses for it that were like, I think very important. So like even like just something simple like transferring money to different countries. Like I have family in Lebanon, like you have to wire transfer and then it goes through a bank, and some areas there's a lot of corruption in certain countries. And so this is a way where you can disintermediate and just send money straight to an individual in any location.
Yeah, it's crazy. And a lot of people on social media said this is like people who are like multimillionaires are trying to move money from, let's say, like Dubai to Europe and so forth. There's so much, regulation just to get your money, like just, a couple hours of a flight away, which is insane to think about. And I have that same issue with India. Like I have to send money sometimes. I have to pay so many fees just to get money to India. And like you have to, there's other ways to do it, but like It's a headache,
Yeah.
and it reduces the headache. Sorry, you're going to say something. You feel eager.
No,
I sense the eagerness.
it's very true. Like it reduces like a lot of the friction that goes in these like payment rails
Yeah.
that go like international. But yeah, I can't actually remember what I was gonna say, but but yeah, it's
It'll
true.
come back.
But that's one thing that what I was gonna say was um it's actually so because all the blockchain stuff happens on a public ledger.
Mhm.
So like if the audience wants to think about it, it's like a giant Google Excel sheet that's
Mhm.
available for viewing from the public. So everything that gets transacted on the blockchain is you can tell it happened. It's just those addresses that are doing it are anonymized
Yeah.
or pseudonymized, right? They have like a an address associated with it, but they're like quite trackable,
Yeah.
too. So it's not like people are trying to like skirt the system, or maybe people try to skirt the system or try to skirt certain things, but it's very easily trackable.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
And I saw a podcast with Logan Paul interviewing this crypto guy, but he's like, the getting a centralized currency for an entire planet is one step into getting, the next advancement of civilization. So I think crypto is going to be here forever, and it's just going to be the next evolution. Don't cancel my U.S. government, but it's going to be the next evolution, and it's not, I don't know when it's going to happen. It's going to happen hopefully in our lifetime, and the next thing you know, we're going to be like a crazy, interplanetary species. Let's go Mars.
Yeah, Mars coin.
Mars coin.
coin soon.
There'll be the Bitcoin, and then there'll be Mars coin
Soon TM. Yeah.
But yeah, so Jeff is not just a entrepreneur, not just a crypto bro. He's also a PhD student. I want to really get into the PhD side of things. So simple question, Jeff: how does one become a PhD student, and how does one finish the PhD program?
I'm not done with it yet. So but I could tell you how to get really, really close to finishing the PhD program. But we were talking a little bit about this like off camera, but if you think about it, like flashback to undergraduate, right? So you're an undergrad, and there's a large bulk of people that are biology majors. And there is a much smaller percentage of those people that end up becoming, say, medical doctors or getting into med school. And I feel like that's usually a lot of people go in as a pre-med into undergrad.
Yeah.
Well, now there's like the lion's share of those individuals that are not going to be in med school or med students, and their skill sets in biology. And one route that's not very well advertised to people is to go down the graduate school route.
Mm-hmm.
So that could be either a master's degree or a PhD degree. And you can go into a PhD degree with just your bachelor's. So some people think you need to do a master's and then go into the PhD. No, you can go bachelor's degree straight into a PhD. And you have to apply as you would like anything generally, but you take the GRE. That's one thing that you need to have, one of the requirements. And then there's certain like prereqs in terms of like certain bio classes you need, certain math classes, certain GPA like cutoffs to make it through the first filtering process and stuff like that. So that's kind of a really traditional application cycle.
Mm-hmm.
But
so for the PhD program application, probably a biology degree or chem degree, some science degree, GRE, good score. What else would you need?
Yeah, that's
research something.
Yeah, some research experience definitely helps a lot, especially if you're, say, deficient in some of those other aspects. So for me personally, my GPA in undergrad wasn't great. It wasn't great at all. I had a lot of fun in undergrad.
Yeah,
but
I was there.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, 2012. But my GPA wasn't so great. So I actually ended up doing a master's degree afterwards, and improved my GPA through my master's degree, but also had the opportunity to publish a few papers in that degree. So I ended up publishing 3 papers, 2 review papers, and 1 primary authorship, which was really great. And that's like a very great way to get a shoe-in into getting into a PhD program, because whether we like it or not, publications are the currency of academia. You need to get publications because a publication shows I have the scientific rigor and the quality and the wherewithal to be able to figure out some kind of scientific problem, find a solution and publish about it. So that's a huge plus.
Okay. So now I'm in the program. I got into the grade school. I got into, I don't know, Stanford, hanging out with Mr. Huberman out there, Dr. Huberman out there. How do you become a PhD? Just PhD doctorate, I guess. Is that the right word?
Yeah.
How do you become a PhD doctorate?
Yeah. So do you have like to get your PhD title at the end? Yeah. So I think this is like where it's like the general public like has, because I get so many questions from my mom. She's like, I don't get it. Why haven't you graduated? It's been more than 4 years and all these things. And so it's a little hard to like to convey it. I hear it from her every time. Like there's one meme about PhDs where it's like, what's the worst thing you can ask them? Which is like, when are you graduating?
I'm sorry.
Because it's like, it's okay. We're cool.
Yeah. Okay.
Which is like a kind of really, it's like semi-subjective. But I guess like to go through the flow. So my program is a little unique where in the first year we take the medical school curriculum. So I was in a lot of the didactic courses in med school at UC Riverside. But usually in your first year, you take a lot of coursework relevant to your program. Specifically, I'm biomedical sciences, so we focus a lot on translational potential of things. So that's why we took the med school courses.
Gotcha.
So the first year would be a little bit more traditional, as one would expect of a student. But during that time, what you're doing is you're rotating in different labs. So you want to find a home lab. So that's going to be a lab you're going to work in with your PI, principal investigator, or your boss. And they work on kind of a niche field of biology usually. And you want to go bounce around to different labs, try them out for 10 weeks and find the lab that you would like to join for the next 4 to 5 years.
What are the type of labs we're talking about?
So they range, right? So there's like labs that are focused on what we call wet lab, which is you're in the lab and you're working with mice, you're working with cells, you're doing different techniques like Western blot ELISAs, staining, some more sophisticated stuff like RNA sequencing, or just like kind of more traditional types of laboratory procedures. And then there's dry labs. Dry labs are strictly a computational labs. So they do bioinformatics. They're working with large data sets and they're like processing and working on like machine learning models to be able to predict certain things, or do like kind of predict certain biomarkers or combinations of biomarkers that might be predictive of disease onset or something like that. So
you go through all those rotations of labs, and that's only the first year?
So the first year, yeah, but the rotations are up to you. So you go and you hunt down certain labs that you're like, I'm really interested in this, I'm interested in that. Oh, this lab's working on therapeutic development, drug development, like I'm really interested in that. And then at the end of the year, you need to come into an agreement with the PI of that lab to say, hey, I want to join your lab. Will you accept me into the lab? And once that kind of handshake agreement occurs, then you kind of formally document that, and now you're in that lab, and that PI is kind of you are now the responsibility of that PI, which is they need to either offer and provide you funding or have funding for you to like do the experimentation you need to do, or you can earn your own money, apply for a grant from the NIH or NSF or some of the other institutions, get your own money and have your money to be able to do the experiments that you need.
Okay. And now after that first year of rotations, now you're into, let's say a lab, or have your own research going. And I hate to ask this question. So how many years is now the PhD program? I'm sure it varies based on your research.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that.
Yeah, it varies on like the type of research you do, how long it takes like it depends what you're assessing. Some things take longer. It depends what models you're working with. If you're working with cancer cells, like cancer cells grow really fast. So you could think like you can output and churn a lot of experiments with those. Yeah. As opposed to say, you're working on longevity research and you're trying to figure out like some solution to aging, right? What does that mean? You need to say you're working with mice. You need to let those mice age to like what's the equivalent of an elderly human, which sometimes is like 16 months, 18 months, something like that. So your experiments, just to get the mice to the age they need to be, is like a year and a half.
Oh, wow.
Right? So just depends on the content of the research you're doing. But there's a lot of things in between first year and finishing,
Yeah.
but usually that procedure or that process takes a total of normative times, usually 5 years, they say.
Mm-hmm.
Rare occasions, people will finish before that, and more likely than not, people will finish usually around 5.5, 6 years. Some people in like the 7th and 8th years.
Okay. So now you have your data. Now you have your new theory.
Mhm.
Okay, what are you doing next now with this newfound data?
So like you have so really the way that you're trained is to you have a hypothesis. So it's like hypothesis driven research. So you need to have a hypothesis in your field of research. So if you're working on like longevity, maybe your hypothesis is that like fake sugars cause this condition, and you need to prove
Yeah.
or disprove that fake sugars cause
Like
that
aspartame
condition.
and Diet Coke shit going on right now.
Yeah, all of that like specific like thing. So you have the hypothesis, and so now you have to, as a scientist, and what you get trained to do as a PhD student is like become an independent scientist. So you need to be able to design the experiments that would get you to the answers that you seek. That's a lot more difficult than it seems, because there's a lot of, once you start doing the experiments, you realize, oh wow, this experiment can go wrong if this little thing is a little different. Oh, this thing was sitting in the fridge for a month later than it should have been. That throws my whole experimentation into
sad.
whack. There's all these moving parts.
Yeah.
But you design the experiment to answer those questions. You execute on those experiments, which requires a lot of like attention to detail.
Mm-hmm.
So execute them. How do you analyze the data that comes out of that? How do you do the statistical analysis for that? There's all different types of stats you can do, different post hoc tests. Like obviously running like a t-test versus an ANOVA is pretty simple, but like different post hoc tests you do, how do you represent that? And when you get those pieces of data, then you need to aggregate them into what we call a story. And that story gets drafted up into a publication, and that publication gets submitted to a journal, and the journal has peer reviewers that they actually don't pay money for doing the peer review for your of the content. They actually
no incentivization there.
They know incentivization. They actually grab academics, so different PIs that are running their labs, right, trying to focus on their research. They'll pull them and say, hey, we'd like you to be a peer reviewer or an editor of the journal. And then those are the people that peer review the content that gets submitted in that field.
Okay.
And if the peer reviewers think that your publication is content to get published, it goes out into the world, and that's like a huge stamp of approval.
Hell yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, that's cool.
Yeah.
So that's the whole PhD program nutshell. It sounds like at the end you have to defend your journal, right?
You have to defend your work. Yeah.
Your
so
work,
so
okay.
some of the stuff like might make its way into a journal and get published to like the world. But there's a whole bunch of other stuff you do along the way that you put in a thesis, which is like usually like a couple 100-page like document that has all the data that you've done throughout your whole 5 years or 6 years or however long it's been. And you do a thesis defense, which is you present that in a 1 hour long presentation, and you submit that 200-page document to your committee, which is usually a set of 3 professors. And it's not until those 3 professors come into consensus that you have completed enough to earn the PhD degree, or you are able to defend your data when they ask you a bunch of questions. That's when you earn the degree. So that's why it's a little subjective, because you have a committee that needs to come into consensus.
Gotcha.
So that's why.
And then they sign your PhD certificate. Boom, bam, comes in the mail.
I'm visualizing it right now.
It's almost there. So now you have your PhD. You're fast forward into the future. Now, as a PhD grad, officially all done, what are your options now?
Oh, that's a really good question, because even people like it's like there's not that much information on, I think, how to even get to the PhD and like the process of going through that. And there's a lot of stuff we didn't talk about. Like we didn't even talk about qualifying exams. We didn't talk about really too much on the process of like submitting a grant proposal to earn your own funding and stuff like that. But anyway, once you have the PhD, I think most people think, I need to go become a professor.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's generally what people think. They'll say, I'm going to become a professor if I have a PhD, which is like absolutely not true. And actually, I think the stat is, and maybe we can run this through ChatGPT.
Yeah.
Jamie.
I can check.
So I think it's 1 to 2% of individuals with a PhD actually end up becoming professors, academic professors.
Oh, wow. Super low.
Tiny percent, which is funny that that's kind of the perception, that the broad perception.
And what's the reality
The reality is
for these? What's the reality for the PhDs? Grads now.
Yeah. So the reality is there is, well, first you usually need to go do your postdoc work in a lab. And you can think of this as the equivalent to like doing your residency in med school, which is you have a lot more autonomy and you can join another lab. You have more independence to do your thing, but it's like an intermediary step before you become a full in med school or medical curriculum. It's become an attending or like a full-fledged doctor, independent doctor. You have to do a postdoc before you can become a full-fledged professor. So that's the intermediary step you have to do to become a professor. The other route is industry, what they call industry, which encompasses like biotech, pharmaceuticals, and that spans from like large scale stuff like Roche and Pfizer and like
Amgen
and Medtronic and stuff like that, and all the way down to like tiny little startups that are a handful of people working
like
on
Kite Pharma, like when it started the CAR T cells.
Yeah, Kite was small and it's scaled up like tremendously.
Yeah, Gilead's like, I got you, buddy.
Yeah. And you've been seeing a lot of these like massive purchases from a lot of they're like feeder companies that like get fed into like the big companies, and then the big companies buy them out. So I'd say a good chunk of people really work their way into working at those big pharmaceutical companies or biotech companies or startups, and certainly pros and cons that come with.
What are the cons? That sounds like that's a concern for people. What are the cons of going into the pharmaceutical industry as a PhD grad? So
I'll lay out like the pros and cons of going towards the professor route and then like the biotech pharma route. So go down the professor route, okay? Professor route, long road, lot of work. Your brain is on all the time. You go home, there's people emailing you, there's data flowing in. You need to worry about where you're going to get the next funding for your whole lab. You have to keep submitting a bunch of grants to the NIH saying, hey, we're doing this type of work, give me money to do the work. It's a lot of high stress. Pro, you get a lot of freedom into the content of the research that you work on.
Cool.
You want to work on something, you have the autonomy and the independence to like work on it the way you want, lead the team the way you want, so long as you have the funding to do those things. So it's literally the polar opposite when you're working in biotech and pharma.
Okay, I would imagine. Yeah.
Right. So like biotech and pharma is, I think you have a little less independence on what you can do. You're kind of more a little bit in a cog in the machine type of thing, where you play your pivotal role in like this segment of the pipeline to make
whatever drug or medical device you want to work on.
Anything, right? Like the company makes a product. So as a researcher, you're not making a product per se, but in a company you are. So you get a little less autonomy, but it's very like, I think, rigid in terms of, this are your hours you're working. Like, yeah, you'll have to maybe do some stuff off hours, but for the most part, it's very well structured. Like, this is my work time, and every time out of that, like, I have a little bit of freedom to like have a better work-life balance. Yeah. So I'd say those are kind of the pros and cons between the two.
Interesting. Okay, I do want to rewind because I think you mentioned it. So I think let's elaborate on getting the PhD process. Talk about that.
Yeah, getting the PhD process. So like some of those aspects that I mentioned, that I was like qualifying exam and things like that. Yeah. Okay. So after the first year, you found your home lab, right? You did your rotations, and I like lab, number 1. I'm going to talk to the PI. Hey, will you accept me? PI says, yep, great. I'd like to accept you. You'll be in my lab for the next 4 to 5 years. Great. there's this really pivotal moment in the middle of your PhD. Usually it happens at the end of your second year, beginning of your third year, around that time. It's called the qualifying exam. And this was like max pain. Like this was max pain. It's so what you do is you set up a committee. The committee is 5 people, at least in and I think that's usually how it is, but definitely at my university it was 5 people. And 5 people, which are professors, so 4 in your department and 1 not in your department. So five individuals, and you have to propose the type of research in detail that you want to do over like the course of your PhD.
Yeah.
So you say, hey, I want, and usually PhDs are broken into 3 aims. So 3 chapters of like what you're trying to figure out. So, I'm trying to figure out, what regulates, this particular protein in this disease. What is the function of that protein in this disease? And like, what is the behavioral impact of that? Like, how does it impact the behavior of an individual if you modulate that protein, for example? So that's like an example 3-step thing. And you have to go in detail each step. How am I going to figure that out? What's the experiment I'm going to do? And so you go through that and you present it to your committee, and the committee has, usually these are set up for, I think, 3 hours. So you present for usually 30 to 45 minutes, and then your committee has about 2 hours to just ask you questions. So you sit there and they'll ask you a gamut of questions. So they can ask you anything from like anything clinical as it pertains to the disease you're trying to study, what type of models you're using to study them, why are you using certain models versus other models, just like as nuanced as they want to get. And so you have to essentially go through that. And then at that point, you're effectively a master's. You earned your master's degree.
Interesting.
Yeah. So if you ever left the program after you finished your qualifying exam, you'd actually, they call it mastering out. So you would leave the program without completing it, but you'd come out with a master's degree.
And you can always come back, maybe, if you wanted to.
You could always come back. Back. And I guess one thing that's important to note about PhDs is you actually don't pay money to be in there. They pay you a stipend, right? So
how much are you getting paid?
You're paid a stipend.
On average.
It's not like a lot, but the way that it's framed is you're half a student and you're half an employee.
Okay.
So as a PhD student, you're half a student, half an employee, and half of the work that you're doing is considered like a learning process, and that's your credits as a student.
Okay.
And the other half is you're an employee. So you get paid, you can think of it like half the salary of what a normal salary would be.
Okay.
Because the other half is considered paying your tuition for being the student. So anyway, and then you finish your qualifying exam, and so now you can continue for the next 3 to 4 years kind of doing the proposed research you said, and then it's kind of a straight shot, and you have yearly meetings with your committee to say, hey, I'm on the right track, and they kind of tell you need to do this or do more of that, and so on and so forth until you make it to the end.
Sounds like the step 3 process in med school. Interesting. It does.
Yeah, a little bit.
In terms of yearly check-ins. Okay.
Yeah, yearly check-ins, but there's less. There's not very much standardization of things. Like med school, there's like step 1, 2, 3, which they've weaned off of. Like they've done a pass-fail on those now. But there's like standardized, like you need to hit these metrics. You finish this at this time. But with the PhD, there's a lot of subjectivity and leniency. And so you kind of have to spend a lot of time driving your own direction for it.
And what's your research that you're working on?
Yeah, so my research is specific for, so we're a virology lab, but we focus a lot on mostly inflammation in the brain as it pertains to viruses. So the bread and butter of the lab is HIV. So HIV, people living with HIV have, because of like the antiretroviral therapies that have existed for like 20 years now, they live to the normal kind of age, the span of life of a normal individual, but they actually have a lot of neurocognitive deficits that pop up. And it's actually in some studies
brain damage.
Yeah, so these manifest as behavioral impairments.
Mhm.
So a lot of kind of dementia-like symptoms, and these pop up in up to 55% of people living with HIV.
That's half. Oh shit.
Yeah, so there's some studies that say some numbers smaller depending on like sampling.
Yeah,
and
but up to half.
up to half.
Wow.
So, my lab, well, my
How many
prof,
people have HIV in the world right now?
in the world, I believe it's 38 million.
It's a lot.
As there's the UN AIDS, I think this was in 2019, was 38 million. So
Yeah.
might be a bit less now,
Yeah.
but in that ballpark.
It was like 2 million in the U.S. I think I read, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I think 2 million in the U.S. Somewhere between 1 and 2 million in the U.S. Obviously, large portion in the southern region of Africa,
Mm-hmm.
and there's two different clades of HIV, so it's a little different. But
Okay.
anyway, so we're focused on understanding the mechanism behind why that you can't really detect the virus anymore after you're on those antiretrovirals,
Mm-hmm.
but you still have neurocognitive problems that are coming up. So if there's no virus that you can detect, why is there still neurocognitive problems coming
Mhm.
up? And so my research focuses on figuring out some targets that might be crucial or pivotal in generating some of those neurocognitive problems.
Have you considered using Moderna's research that's upcoming with their mRNA vaccine for HIV that's coming up?
No, yeah, we haven't like kept up with that.
Yeah, it's coming up.
Okay, yeah, I'll need to look into it. Yeah, I'm
Tell your lab like, hey guys.
yeah, let's do it. Let's do it.
Let's look at this.
Yeah, no, there's like some things that we know work fairly well. So there's like certain people with a genetic mutation in this receptor CCR5.
Is that the people who cannot get HIV?
Yeah, so
Yeah.
people can't get HIV. And so there's like some things that are known.
It's like Magic Johnson, I think, is an example, right?
No, there was
There's old
somebody.
white guy, I remember.
There was somebody in I think it was in China where they they like super unethically just CRISPR'd like two kids or something like that.
Okay.
But I think they we might need to fact check me. But they did like a CCR5 kind of knockout on those kids.
Wow.
Yeah. So like like in the future, like some gene therapy things might be in the works. But yeah, so in the lab, I'm working on figuring out like, because there's when things manifest symptomatically, there's like an underlying cellular thing occurring
Mhm.
that's causing that, right? Like behavioral problems, like in the CNS, is because often there's
That's
like
central nervous system.
oh yeah, central nervous system. Yeah, in the central nervous system, they're often like impairments in neurons, right?
Mhm.
So there's like something going on with the neurons. Like maybe the neurons are all dying. Maybe they're like not able to communicate with each other very well. Like right, those like neurotransmitters are not firing off very well.
Mhm.
Maybe there's a lot of glutamate around, and that's causing like toxicity. And a lot of times, especially in the context of viruses, there's a lot of inflammation.
Mhm.
Right, there's a lot of inflammation in the brain. So my research focuses a lot on the inflammation in the brain, what type of inflammation we're seeing, right? And this kind of goes hand in hand a bit with COVID, right? There's a lot of kind of the brain fog and long COVID symptoms people are talking about. There's inflammation profiles. You see different factors going up.
Mm.
People talk about the cytokine storm, right? There's certain factors that go up, and how do those factors impact kind of the integrity of neurons around them?
Yeah, but what you're trying to get at earlier is like a lot of this data is kind of like just available and accessible for everyone. A lot of the research would be way more streamlined, way more incentivized, and just data and information just be like available, and you can do something out of it much faster, more efficiently.
That's like
So-
spot on.
Yeah. So Research Hub, it's going to be the next big thing. I really, really believe it. But then with all what you're doing, how do you do everything that you do? How do you make the time for everything that you do when it comes to being an entrepreneur, a PhD student, a crypto pro, and now married?
Yeah.
How do you make time for everything?
Yeah, recently married. It's I you kind of like, I don't know. I'm one of those people that I like to I don't like sprint very often, but I like do things consistently over a long period of time. So usually my days are kind of broken up in the mornings. I like to do usually kind of try to front load meetings in the mornings, and then do a lot of the kind of lab work in the middle of the day, right? So do like kind of the traditional like work, like 8 hour workload,
Mm-hmm.
and then come home and then eat and kind of hang out for a little bit, but then bust out the laptop and do some like light
Get to work.
data analysis, like responding to emails, like things of that nature. And it's really like time management. Like you have a lot of time, a lot of times there's like pockets of time that are available in the middle of the day where people would just kind of maybe go on their phone, or maybe they'll like chat with somebody next to them in like their cubicle or in their lab space.
Mm-hmm.
And like instead of doing that, that's like 10 or 15 minutes where you can get this thing knocked out.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a lot of there's a little bit of sacrifice too, of course, right? You need to maybe pull away from doing some of like the, what do you call it, enjoyable things you want to do, and just it I guess maybe, so this is gonna sound cliche, but like
Say it.
really doing something you're super hyper passionate about, and that you actually don't feel like, I know like people say you wanted to work a job you don't feel like you're working because you enjoy it so much.
Mm-hmm.
But really, that's really how it feels. I enjoy like doing a lot of the work that I do at Research Hub just because I'm very passionate about the issue. I'm very excited about finding a solution for that.
Mm-hmm.
The like environment of the people that I'm like interfacing with is really wonderful, and I don't feel like I'm working. And so where someone might think, oh, I'm doing a lot of work, I think, yeah, I'm working. I'm doing some work, and I'm doing work that's like kind of enjoyable to me. And so it doesn't mentally weigh me down as maybe some people might think.
Okay. And then what's your best advice for people who are similar to you, just like hustlers? What's your advice to them, just general speaking?
I would say one of the things it would be like just do something you're just passionate about. Like, I don't know, maybe I'm like I'm entering boomer years now, so I'm like 30, I'm 31, but like when you're in your early 20s, you kind of don't have a sense of time too much. You're like, oh, I'm just gonna do this, and just like a day goes by, and you're like, yeah, it's just like go have fun, do that.
Yeah.
But I think afterwards you kind of have a little bit more sense of time, and you really start realizing that time is like probably one of the most valuable assets. And so I would say just do something you really enjoy and you're really passionate about doing. And I think everything else falls into place after that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, so I totally agree. Like you have so much time in high school and college, like insane amount of times, and just don't waste it on video games. Don't waste it on like stupid shit, hanging out, eating food, and just doing absolutely nothing. Just grind, and then you'll be completely fine. Yeah, I don't know if you remember Mr. Dare. Mr. Dare said this to us.
Yeah.
The people who work hardest in their 20s are the most successful in their 30s.
Yeah.
And they had so much time from the age of like 16 to 25. Use it.
Yeah, I would say that's like a really good, but also like you have to be in the right mental space to and mature enough to know that you should do that.
Yeah,
too, right. Like a lot of people aren't. I certainly wasn't, and like so like in that time, But it's also important to have those patches of time where you're enjoying your life and like have fun. You can't like
at the same time do enjoy your life. Don't get me wrong, but don't waste time that you have, because you are probably the most sharp in those ages and have the most time, and there's way more avenues that you can like learn and lean into. And I love what you said earlier about being a bio major or chemical or chem major, anything in the life sciences in general. There are so many people who end up being a bio major, like, oh, I'm going to be a doctor, I'm going to be a nurse, or, something like that, and then, or I'm going to get my master's, but they really have no idea what the heck they want to do.
Yeah,
I was a bio major. I had no idea what the heck I wanted to do. Like, I think you mentioned Joyce was like in the same realm, right? I was like, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I got my MBA instead, and I got like just having the business degree with my bio degree opened like the world to me. So it's just like, but people who really want to do, be a bio major and really want to get into the PhD program. So thanks for sharing that information, because I'm super passionate about what's next, because there's not enough knowledge, not enough counseling in college to what to do as a bio major, chem major, or anything in that sense. So,
yeah, there isn't enough information about it. And I mean, we just scratched the surface of like that, right? Like those are kind of the two bigger buckets of what you could do, but there's governmental jobs, right? You can go work at like the NIH or the CDC or even like the DoD funds
Yeah.
and like has their own types of labs that work on things. Even this is like kind of like cool. So like NASA even has a lot of like opportunities to fund like biological research
Hmm.
as it pertains to like,
Yeah,
you know,
growing like a tree or bacteria on Mars or the moon or something.
yeah, stuff like that. But even some like really cool stuff and things like how radiation in the transit from like say you're going from Earth to the moon, Earth to Mars, how like the radiation impacts like your gut microbiome on
Mm.
that transit over, like stuff like that you wouldn't think, but they're like opportunities to work in like these more
Yeah,
kind of
you can work for
government-funded.
airline companies, and they need to see what the temperature and pressure, what if how it would affect the fuel
Yeah,
itself, of the
yeah,
jet fuel, and they do that every single flight going up. There's way out like 1,000 of options what you can do as a bio or chem major or related.
yeah. Even like this is like much more niche, but like becoming a patent attorney, right? You
Mm.
need to have some kind of like engineering or
Yeah,
scientific
yeah,
degree
yeah.
to then go to get your JD to become a patent lawyer to, help pharmaceutical companies with like that's like a
They make
whole,
bank. They make bank.
yeah, that's like a whole like jurisdiction in pharmaceutical is
Yeah,
like,
and med device. Yeah,
yeah, like different like patent IP and things like that. That's really
yeah.
really really
IP law
important.
is insane. One of my buddies is an engineer and a lawyer,
Mm-hmm.
and actually going to his wedding in a couple of weeks. But this guy's a genius, man. Like to have that much wealth of knowledge is insane. But it comes with a lot of, I'm sure, monetary incentivization. So
Totally.
there are avenues left and right. You
Totally.
know.
I would say one of the good things, maybe like last thing I'll say on this is uh if you can overlap skill sets, it makes you that much more marketable, right? So
Mm,
like if you're just kind of a biology major, like your friends does engineering, like you can be very successful. And if that's your passion, definitely like
yeah.
just go down that route. But if you overlay that with like a skill set in like law, right, you become like a very kind of niche individual. And when people need you as a resource, you become very, very, very
Yeah.
marketable.
And my advice for any person in any corporate industry or my advice for anyone in life is to have a mentor. You
Mm,
really need a mentor because sometimes you might be going down a path that you might not be, fully aware of. It might be the unknown. Find a mentor. They will set you the right tone. Even if it's not something that they do, they'll set you in the right direction.
totally,
Yeah.
yeah. Mentorship, especially if like I don't know, like you're like me, like my parents never went to college, right? So my parents didn't know anything about a PhD program.
Hmm.
My mom still doesn't know. It's funny. One of my friends, we just had our graduation, our commencement,
Yeah.
and he was like, his parents were there and stuff like that, and he was telling me, I was like, oh, how'd your parents like it? And he was like, yeah, I looked at my mom. My mom was like looking up something on her phone, and she said she typed, "What is a PhD?"
Yeah.
In her phone on her son's graduation date for like the PhD. And so it's like, you
That's
yeah,
funny, bro.
yeah. And it's like, you don't get mentorship from your parents, especially
Hmm.
if they're not like, traditionally academically trained. And so find that mentorship
Yeah.
from somebody.
So yeah, this is one of the reasons I do the podcast because if you need to find a mentor, we have a PhD to be almost done with it. He's also a master's, also undergraduate degree, also entrepreneur, also everything. So if you need a mentor, we got Jeffrey Koury, and I will always be anyone's mentor. I'm trying to like my whole goal of this is to like just connect knowledge together and connect
Yeah.
people together. So if you need someone, I got you. Just keep watching the podcast. Um, and speaking of which, I got some to end this, I got some simulated questions for you. Let me grab my iPad.
Oh boy. All right, let's go.
Please don't die. No.
Oh, tragic.
Tragic. Oh, I can cut this out.
Down.
Oh, thank you, editing. Maybe I'll leave it in. Who knows? I was supposed to cut something out. I did it. So let's see how this goes. Ready for the questions?
Let's do it.
This is surprise questions. He does not know what this is going
I'm
to be.
scared.
All right. Cool. All right. Oh, you're not ready for these, are you?
Oh, dude.
Okay. Okay.
I don't like that you're giggling about him.
All right. Ready? Ready? Ready?
Let's do it.
Let's be something silly. If you were the president, what would you do?
If I was the president, what would I do? I think I would definitely beef up medical and biological funding, the budget around that.
Mhm.
But I would try to not put that all onto the NIH because large bureaucratic systems work really slowly. And I
True.
would try to actually fragment that into much smaller orgs and then try to disseminate the money that way.
Okay. We talked a lot about what you do. What are some strange random habits or hobbies that you have?
Strange random ones. I played a lot of ping pong. Was in the ping pong club in high school. So ping pong is something I'm like super competitive with like sports.
You're a good ball player, I'll tell you that.
Ball up, yeah.
Yeah, we can play basketball after this, maybe. And then here's a last one. If there's one thing in life that you want and are willing to struggle for that we haven't talked about, what would that be? Yeah, I got real deep, didn't I? I got super deep.
I think just having a life that you can be proud of that you've gone through, because I think a lot of times people seek happiness, but there's times in life where there's like not gonna be happiness sometimes. And so I think seeking a life that you can be really happy, like you can be proud of that you did. And so that can be like, for people that's different, right? Like for people that's, I want to have a family, and for people that's, I want to have a really balanced life. I want to have a family and I want to have my career, but not really lean too heavily into either one. Once financial success, something like that. So I think, having a life.
There's this quote by Ralph Emerson, I think his name is a poet or a writer. It's a really long poet or poem, but Ralph Emerson said, to live life is to leave some sort of legacy behind, be as simple as like planting a tree or making a child smile.
Yeah.
And I think that's what you're kind of going for. So
yeah,
just leave the world a better place than it was before.
Yeah. And that's different for each individual, and each individual has to figure that out along the way.
And then open forum, anything you want to say? Final thoughts?
No, I mean, like, thank you so much for having me on this.
Yeah.
This was a pleasure. It's really good, catching up and seeing you again, catching up like in public, like so everyone can see it.
I should do live next time.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But no, I think one thing I'd like to like definitely say is I'm really happy like we can talk about these things, and there's like an audience that will hopefully like learn something from it, because in my opinion, I think science communication is really important, because everyone's a biological or like organism.
Yeah.
And so everything we do and prescribe has an impact on every single person that exists. And so I think it's important that people are educated as much as they can on the topics of that. And I think that one thing your podcast does is give a venue for people to learn about those things. So yeah, I appreciate that. And I think you should definitely keep at it, and I'll be here to hop on for round 2 anytime.
Yeah. Would love to have you. Thank you everyone for watching. This is Jeffrey Koury, soon to be PhD. I'll see you next time. Peace.
Nice.
Thanks for listening. See you next time.